It was supposed to be just another night. I'd come back from the hardware store with a new filter for the upstairs vent and a pack of screws that would go into the drawer and probably never get used. The kind of quiet errand a man does when he's trying to stay useful, present, still needed. That's the illusion I'd been maintaining for years. Not father, not husband, just necessary. The sun had dipped low. The sky was a soft bruise, and the motion light on the garage hadn't kicked on. The bulb had burned out days ago. I'd been meaning to replace it. Another thing to fix. Another job to keep me from thinking too hard. I stepped into the carport through the side gate, the gravel crunching under my boots, and immediately noticed how quiet it was. Not calm, quiet. The kind of quiet where the air feels too still, where the silence isn't peace, it's a warning. That's when I heard his voice. Luke, my stepson, 18 years old, 6 feet tall, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved to spit judgment. Always too calm, always too clever. He was the type who never raised his voice unless it was to ask for something. His tone that night was no different. It's done. He won't make it. Tomorrow everything changes. He said it like he was reading a receipt. Cold. Final. There was no fear in his voice. No excitement either. That's what made it worse. No tremble. No thrill. Just clean execution. A matter-of-fact update to whoever was on the other end of the line. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't angry. He was just done. That was the word that kept ringing in my head. Done. Like he'd flipped a switch. Like I wasn't even a person anymore. And standing beside him, half in the shadows beneath the carport beam, was Megan. My wife. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't say, "Luke, what the hell are you talking about?" She didn't even turn to see if I was standing there, because I don't think she was surprised. She just watched him, eyes dry, hands folded, like a woman waiting for a train to arrive, not a murder to be confessed. I felt my stomach go hollow. That kind of hollow you only feel once in your life, the second you realize your family might be safer without you. Not happier, not freer, safer. I didn't move, not at first. I stood behind the lattice wall of the carport, the shadows draping me like a veil. My right hand clenched around the bag from the hardware store. My fingers squeezed around the plastic until the screws punched holes through the bottom. They hit the pavement with a sound I thought might betray me. Luke didn't notice. Megan didn't turn. And that's when I understood something that should have been obvious years ago. They were never mine. Not in any way that mattered. Not in any way that would stop them from discarding me the moment it became convenient. I stepped back quietly. No slam of the door, no cry for answers. I didn't storm in and demand an explanation. That would have made it about drama, about confrontation. Luke would have twisted it, Megan would have softened it, and suddenly I would have been the unreasonable one. Again. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I vanished. I walked to the SUV, still parked on the side of the street, still warm from the drive. I got in, set the bag of broken screws on the passenger seat, and turned the ignition over. No hesitation, no second-guessing. I'd been waiting for this moment, even if I didn't know it, for years. There was one man I trusted to look beneath a lie. Just one. Tom Harris, Luke's real father. A man who hated me, and I respected him for that. He had reason to hate me. I'd married Megan 2 years after their divorce. Took in her son like he was mine. Paid for the house, the school, the clothes. Built the life Tom had left behind in cigarette ash and slammed doors. He never raised a hand to Luke, but he never raised anything else either. Not a dollar. Not a phone call. Not a finger to help. And yet, somehow, he was always just there, like a shadow that Luke couldn't quite forget. Or wouldn't. But Tom was a mechanic. A real one. 30 years in the same Rockford garage, under the same rusted Ford sign, with grease on his knuckles and truth in his bones. He had no time for drama, or lies, or polite fiction. He believed in what he could see with his own eyes. And he never sugarcoated what he saw. I made the call from the cul-de-sac 2 streets over. Didn't say much. Just told him I had a car I needed looked at. One I didn't trust in anyone else's hands. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Not confusion, not reluctance. Just calculation. He said, "Bring it before dawn." That was all. I parked the SUV in a public lot near an old church off 9th and Whitehall. It was the kind of spot no one ever checked unless they were trying to hide something. I walked 2 blocks to a rental I'd booked using cash and a favor. Slept with one eye open. Before the sun rose, I was standing next to a flatbed driver I barely knew, watching my vehicle get strapped down and winched onto the rig. The driver asked no questions. That's why I hired him. But before I handed over the keys, I left something behind. A note, plain white paper folded once, tucked into the dash. No threats, no riddles, no monologue, just a sentence. From your son. Check under the hood. I knew Luke would read it. I knew Megan would find it. And I knew that whatever story they were planning to tell, it would unravel the moment that engine block got pulled open by someone who didn't care whose name was on the title. That was the difference between me and them. They lived in appearances. I dealt in truth. By the time the truck pulled onto the freeway, the air in my lungs felt sharper, colder, like I'd stepped into a different reality. One where silence wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. One where love wasn't enough to keep you safe, not when the people closest to you were already sharpening the blade. I didn't cry. That part of me had died years ago. Somewhere between the slammed doors, the eye rolls, the whispered comparisons to the man who walked out when Luke was 4, but somehow still got to be dad whenever it suited him. I gave this family everything. Not just money, not just time. I gave them the part of me that believed in family, and they buried it without a sound. So when I walked into that carport and heard my stepson planning my disappearance like it was nothing more than a schedule change, I didn't feel rage, or heartbreak, or fear. I felt release, because now I had proof. And proof, unlike promises, doesn't lie. They say silence is a weapon. That morning it became my shield. The truck carrying my SUV was already 2 counties out by the time the sun cracked the horizon. I stood at the edge of a bus terminal, coffee gone cold in my hand, watching strangers drift past like leaves in a current. Mothers clutching toddlers, workers hunched over their phones, a man talking to no one. All of them invisible the way I had felt for years inside my own home. But not today. Today I had their attention. I didn't drive the SUV straight to Tom because I wanted them to notice it was gone. I wanted Luke to step outside and see the empty space in the carport. I wanted Megan to pretend to be confused when he asked her what happened. I wanted the engine not to be there when they finally decided to finish whatever plan they had rehearsed. Because I knew what was waiting under that hood. I left no doubt, no ambiguity. Just the note on the dash folded once, stark white. I printed the words neatly, slowly, like I was etching them into stone. From your son. Check under the hood. No signature, no threat, no accusation, just truth. Measured. Surgical. That note wasn't for Luke. It wasn't for Megan. It was for me. Because up until that moment, they still thought I didn't know. They still thought I was playing house, blind and grateful. Still thought I'd pay the bills and patch the walls and nod my head like some neutered version of a father figure, desperate for crumbs of affection. But I'd stopped playing their game. That note was the announcement. And just like I expected, the panic came quickly. 2 hours after sunrise, my phone began to buzz. First once, then again. Then again. A cascade of missed calls. A dozen voicemails piling up like trash outside a house nobody lived in anymore. Megan's name flashed across the screen again and again. Then Luke. No voice messages from him, just calls. Over and over. As if he could batter down the silence with enough digital noise. I didn't answer. I didn't even listen. Because I already knew what they were saying. I could see it clearly in my mind. Megan pacing the kitchen in her robe, phone pressed tight against her cheek, voice trembling as she whispered through teeth clenched with fear. Luke standing by the window, arms crossed, trying to keep his mask on while the cracks in his voice gave him away. They were trying to figure out what I knew, what I'd seen, what I'd done. And that was the part they'd never understand. Not Megan, not Luke. I didn't need revenge. I needed distance. This wasn't a reckoning. It was an escape. Because when you've spent over a decade carrying a family that never truly let you in, not really, you stop craving justice. You stop asking for recognition. You stop hoping they'll change. You just want out before they bury what's left of you. Let them stew. Let them guess. Let the silence become the mirror they couldn't look into before. I turned the phone off, pulled the SIM card, broke it in half with my thumb, tossed it in the trash beside a gas pump outside a shuttered bait shop. I had nothing left to say, but I wasn't done acting. I rented a second car under a different name, paid in cash, drove 6 hours west, cutting through dead farmland and empty streets lined with shuttered shops. By the time I crossed the Rockford city limits, the sky had gone that ugly gray it wears before snow, heavy, silent, full of unspoken threats. Tom's shop sat at the end of a cracked industrial block behind a chain-link fence laced with rust and half-torn plastic flags that flapped in the wind like warning signs nobody bothered to read. He was already outside when I arrived, leaning against a toolbox the size of a coffin, grease up to his elbows. Same flannel shirt he probably wore a decade ago. He looked at me like a man looks at a toothache he thought he'd pulled. No words, just a nod toward the garage bay. The SUV was already there, waiting, hood open. I didn't speak, just walked beside him, the wind snapping cold against my face, and looked down into the machine that had nearly become my grave. The brake line was sliced, not frayed, not worn, not chewed through by time or vermin. Sliced, straight, precise, clean like a razor. Tom tapped it with the edge of a screwdriver, let the severed rubber sway for a moment, then looked at me. No accusation, no sympathy, just fact. Someone did this on purpose. Then he wiped his hands on a rag, reached for his phone, and walked away. I didn't ask who he was calling. I didn't need to. I knew Tom, he didn't waste breath. If he was making a call, it meant someone needed to hear what he'd just seen. I stood there alone in the garage for a long time, listening to the wind hammer the aluminum siding, watching that cut brake line swing slightly in the still air, like the pendulum of a clock ticking down a life that should have ended hours ago. I wasn't angry. That's what surprises people when I tell this part of the story. The absence of fury. But you don't get to be angry when you've already been erased. You don't get to rage when the people you fed, housed, and protected saw you as nothing more than a bump in the road. You just breathe. You just stand still and let the truth wrap itself around your ribs like barbed wire. Tight enough to hurt, not deep enough to kill. I remembered the little things. The way Luke had asked to borrow the SUV last week and then suddenly changed his mind. The way Megan had asked if I was still planning to drive to Springfield that morning, and then reminded me, sweetly, not to forget my seatbelt. The way the garage door remote had gone missing for a day. None of it meant anything at the time. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't stab. It whispers. You don't feel the knife go in. You just wake up bleeding. Tom came back 20 minutes later. Didn't say who he'd talked to. Didn't need to. Just dropped a folder on the workbench, lit a cigarette, and nodded toward the office. You should probably sit down. I didn't. I opened the folder. Photos, printouts, screenshots, receipts. Someone, probably Tom, maybe someone he knew, had pulled Luke's browser history, his messages, his chats. Social media posts scrubbed clean, but cached and saved like fossils. One thread in particular stood out. A conversation between Luke and someone named Jax. Slang. Emojis. Lots of laughing. But one sentence was crystal clear. He won't be around long. Trust me. No sarcasm. No joking. Plan. I closed the folder. The garage was too quiet now, even with the wind howling outside. Tom stood by the bench, arms crossed, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I just stared at the photos, at the screen grabs, at the proof that I had lived in a house where my death was not just imagined, it was arranged. And Megan. She knew. She had to. She stood there under the carport that night with her arms folded and her eyes flat. She heard the same words I heard. Maybe she didn't believe he'd follow through. Maybe she thought it was just teenage anger dressed up in bravado. But she didn't stop it. She didn't warn me. She didn't speak. And silence, when you have power, is not neutrality. It's consent. I left the garage just after dusk. The sun was a bleeding smear behind the clouds. I didn't take the SUV. I didn't speak to Tom again. He knew enough to leave it alone. I got back into the rental, drove to a diner outside town, and sat in a corner booth watching the waitress refill coffee for truckers who hadn't slept in days. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just kept staring at the front door like I expected someone to walk through it. And someone did. At 8:42 p.m. a dark blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. The kind Luke used to borrow from Megan on weekends. The engine clicked as it cooled. 2 doors opened. And that's when I saw them. Luke and Megan. Together. He walked ahead. She followed. And by the look on his face, the frozen confusion when he spotted the empty table, the furrow in his brow when he scanned the lot and didn't see the SUV, I knew the plan had failed, and the story had just begun. There's a silence that follows survival, a hush that settles not in the world, but in the body, low and permanent, like ash in the lungs. That's what I felt in the days after Rockford. Not relief, not victory, just silence. The kind that tells you the people you lived with, the ones who laughed in your kitchen, who left their shoes at your door, who called you stepdad when they needed money and not my real father when they needed a weapon, would rather see you vanish than admit they owe you anything. And I had almost vanished. Almost. If not for that instinct in the carport, if not for the light in Luke's voice, too calm, too controlled, I wouldn't be here to feel this silence at all. Tom didn't offer to keep the SUV. He didn't say, you should go to the police. He didn't call it attempted murder or conspiracy or anything else dramatic. He just stood beside me in the garage, looked down at the sliced brake line, and said, "This ain't an accident." That was enough. Because Tom was the kind of man who only believed what he could put a wrench to. And that's why I trusted him. Not because we liked each other, but because neither of us ever lied to the other about who we were. I took the car there not because I thought he'd protect me, but because I knew he wouldn't protect Luke. That's the difference. A mechanic doesn't give you stories. He gives you evidence. Cold, clean, mechanical. Truth that's harder than family, louder than love, and sharper than betrayal. Back home, my name was already being scrubbed from the narrative. I knew it before I even got back. Megan had probably already begun drafting a version of the story where I had abandoned them, where I had taken off in a fit of paranoia, leaving Luke devastated, confused, innocent. She'd tell her sister I was always too intense, that I couldn't handle stress, that maybe I was losing touch. She'd find ways to suggest that whatever happened, it was sad, but no one's fault. Definitely not Luke's. But there was one thing she couldn't twist: the brake line, and the folder Tom gave me. A folder full of screenshots, conversations, maps, searches, and casual digital footprints left behind by a boy too arrogant to believe someone might check. It was all there. Google searches. How to disable brakes without triggering lights. Reddit threads about accidental car failures. TikToks tagged with hashtag die pranks but riddled with comments that blurred the line between joke and blueprint. The worst part wasn't the planning. It was the tone. He never sounded afraid. Never hesitated. Every message was a performance of control. Of amusement. Like this was all a game. Stepdaddy's gonna hit that hill near the light and suddenly forget how to stop. You'll see. I read that line twice. 3 times. Each word felt like it carved something off my spine. It wasn't the death he wanted. Not really. It was the absence. He didn't need me to suffer. He just needed me gone. Cleanly. Quietly. Like deleting a file you don't use anymore. A week after the flatbed rolled out of my neighborhood, I returned to my city. Not home. Not yet. Just close enough to see how far things had already slipped. The mail was piling up at the house. 2 packages on the porch. A few letters jammed into the slot with my name still on them. But I didn't go to the front door. I went to the storage unit. I had rented it months ago, originally for tools, spare wood, winter tires. But it had become more than that. A bunker. A space where no one questioned my presence. where no one asked why I was storing every receipt, every bill, every tuition payment tied to Luke's name. Inside, I laid the folder out across a folding table and began matching the digital trail to the paper one. Here's what I found. Megan had known about the messages at least 3 days before I overheard Luke in the carport. Her email was linked to his cloud account. She saw them, some of them at least. Luke had tried to cancel a brake inspection I'd scheduled 2 weeks earlier. He logged into my mechanic's site and deleted the appointment. I thought I had forgotten to book it. A wire transfer, $1,500, had moved from Megan's account to Luke's 2 days before the carport conversation. Labeled, for books. But there were no books. There was only a burner phone. The same one he was speaking into when he said the words that changed everything. It's done. He won't make it. Tomorrow everything changes. Every piece fit. Every line led back to him. And her. So I took it one step further. I met with a lawyer. Not a flashy one. Not the type with a marble office and a paralegal in heels. Just a man named Reed who specialized in silence. His office was lined with books no one had opened in years. He had a voice like a gravel road and eyes that didn't blink too often. I handed him the folder. Didn't say much. He read in silence. Page by page. Line by line. When he was done, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. You have enough to ruin them. I nodded. But that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to ruin anyone. I wanted to be done. To take everything I had given and undo it. The tuition. The insurance. The emergency contacts that still had me listed as father. The car registration. The co-signed lease. The medical proxy. All of it. Undone. We spent 2 days making the calls, filing the forms, sending the letters. Quietly. Legally. Cleanly. And with each signature, each notarized document, each confirmation email, I could feel the weight shifting. Like I was finally stepping out from under the wreckage of a family that never saw me as anything more than scaffolding. But there was one more step. One last place lies couldn't live. The school. Luke's university had no idea who I was beyond a number on a payment portal. They didn't know what I looked like. They didn't know I'd been the one feeding the account every month so his dorm room stayed warm and his fridge full. So I made an appointment. Told them I was withdrawing my financial support effective immediately. Told them that any further charges should be redirected to the student and his legal guardians. The woman behind the desk blinked. Is this about a FAFSA denial? I shook my head. No, it's about truth. I'm not the father. He made that very clear. She didn't ask more questions. She just clicked a few buttons and printed a receipt. And with that, the last cord was cut. I drove back through campus in the rental car, watching students spill across intersections in packs, all noise and caffeine and half-lived dreams. I wondered which window was Luke's, wondered if he was asleep, or if the silence had finally reached him, because silence, like a letter bomb, always arrives late, and always explodes in the hands of the person who thought they'd won. There's a certain stillness that only comes after you've burned the bridge behind you and watched the smoke disappear. I thought I'd reached that stillness. I thought I'd crossed into the part of my life where the past no longer followed me, only haunted those who tried to rewrite it. But closure is never a clean cut. It's a splinter, working its way back to the surface. It was a Tuesday. I remember that detail because Tuesdays used to be pizza nights. Luke and Megan would bicker about toppings. I always ordered half mushroom, half pepperoni, pretending the compromise was a joke and not the last ritual left holding the family together. Those dinners were quieter in the final months. More chewing, less talking. That's how rot spreads. Silently, beneath the sauce and crust. But that Tuesday was different. I was living out of a friend's converted loft near the train tracks. Dusty, cold, furnished with a mattress on the floor, and a hot plate that sparked if you turned the knob too far. But it was mine. Every plank, every window pane. No eyes rolling when I spoke. No silence sharp enough to draw blood. I was reading through a list of jobs, thinking about picking up night security work. Something thankless, invisible. A role that matched how I'd been treated. That's when the knock came. Not a buzz from the intercom. Not a call. A knock. Deliberate. Heavy. Male. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood still, let the moment breathe. Because deep down, I already knew. I walked to the door. Listened. One voice. Then another. Low. Urgent. I opened it slowly. Luke stood on the threshold. And he wasn't alone. The man beside him was tall. Thinner than I remembered. His hair had thinned. His jaw now bore the collapse of a life lived without consequence. But the eyes, those hadn't changed. Tom Harris. Luke's biological father. The man who had once punched a hole in my kitchen wall because Megan wouldn't take him back. The man who dropped out of Luke's life whenever things got difficult. Then reappeared like a seasonal disease whenever guilt outweighed his pride. I almost didn't recognize him without the smell of beer. But there he was. Luke stood between us, arms folded, chin lifted, like he was walking into a courtroom and expected to be absolved. Tom didn't speak. Not right away. His eyes traveled past me, into the room behind. A flicker of judgment. I didn't invite them in. I just waited. Finally, Tom spoke. "You've got something that belongs to my son." It hit me harder than I thought it would. That word, belongs, like Luke was a child again. Like Tom had ever held on to anything long enough to know what it meant to keep. I kept my voice flat. "You're going to have to be more specific." Luke exhaled. Like this was all so exhausting for him. "The car." I blinked once. Slowly. "The car that tried to kill me?" He didn't answer. He just shrugged. Like the details didn't matter. Like the brake line was a misunderstanding. A speed bump on the way back to normal. Tom stepped forward. "Look, whatever happened, he's just a kid. You're a grown man. You don't punish him by holding on to something that's not yours." I felt the heat rise in my throat. Not anger. Not yet. Just heat. I stepped out of the doorway not to let them in, but to stand face to face. "You think this is about a car?" Tom's expression didn't change. "It is. That's what this is really about, right? You're angry. You want to teach him a lesson. Fine. But you made your point." "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I have." Luke snorted. "Oh, come on. You canceled everything. Tuition. The rent. Mom's card. You blocked our numbers, vanished like some martyr in a movie. What else do you want?" I turned toward him. "An apology." He laughed. Laughed. Right there in the hallway like I told a joke. "You're joking, right?" "No, I'm not." Tom stepped in again. "He's not going to say what you want to hear. He's a teenager. You've got to let this go. Be the bigger man." I looked at Tom for a long time. Then I said what I'd been holding back for years. "Being the bigger man is exactly how I ended up raising your son." Silence. Tom's jaw tightened. His fist clenched. Luke shifted his weight like he wasn't sure which of us he was about to defend. But none of them spoke. So I kept going. "Where were you when Megan couldn't make rent? Where were you when Luke needed braces? Where were you when he called me dad that one time because you didn't show up for his birthday?" Tom stepped forward, voice low. "That's not what this is about." "No, that's exactly what this is about. You want the car? Take it. But you take everything else too. The bills, the calls, the responsibility. All the years I carried so your son could pretend someone like you was worth admiring." His face flushed. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said. "I think I was better to him than you ever were." Luke cut in, voice sharp now. "You think this makes you some kind of hero? All you ever did was hold money over my head. You wanted loyalty for paying bills." "No," I said calm. "I wanted respect. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted to know that when I looked at the boy I raised, he saw me, not just the shadow of a man who never earned the right to be called father." Luke shook his head, disgusted. "You're pathetic." And there it was. The word. Small, but final. Pathetic. That's what I was to him. After everything. After every sleepless night. Every shift I picked up to keep him in school. Every holiday I spent smiling across a table where I was barely tolerated. Not a father. Not even a man. Just a pathetic obstacle in the way of his real life. I stepped back into the doorway. Cold air slid in between us. My eyes didn't blink. "You'll never see the car again," I said softly. "You'll never see a cent from me. Not one. You made your choice in the carport. And now I'm making mine." Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but even he could see it. The door was closing. Luke stepped forward, voice rising. "You can't just walk away." I held his gaze. "You walked away first. The night you planned my funeral." He flinched. I closed the door. This time I let it echo. Their voices followed me through the wood. Raised. Frantic. Maybe angry. Maybe desperate. I didn't listen. I didn't care. Because there comes a point where you stop mourning what never loved you back. There comes a point where survival isn't enough, you want clarity. And clarity is cruel. It tells you that the son you thought you had was never yours. It tells you the woman you married stood quietly by while her child plotted your erasure. It tells you that the years you gave are gone, and the thanks will never come. So you let them scream. You let them pound the door. And you keep walking one room deeper into your own silence. Because the only thing colder than being hated is being invisible. And that's what I became. Not to the world, just to them. And sometimes that's the only escape there is.